I believe there was some information provided today regarding 12.2 and the removal or the change of some terminology within that particular management plan.
So you'd like that item removed out of en bloc?
I just want to have that more so formally discussed so that all councillors can get across that, please.
So that's fine. So I have item 12.2 and 12.3 coming out of en bloc. So that leaves item 12.4, 12.5, 12.6, 12.7, 12.8, 12.9 to be moved en bloc. Can I have a mover? Councillor McLennan, seconded. Councillor McWilliam. Anyone against? I'll declare that carried. So councillors, we will move on to item 12.2. Use not listed short stay accommodation, 13A Gallagher Street, Eden Hill. So would the officer like to speak to this?
Through you, Madam Mayor, and just in response to Councillor Ames's likely query. As councillors would be aware, Ms Kania distributed an amended attachment today, which is provided by the applicant. That addressed one of the queries from last week regarding the noise monitoring devices. As was identified in one of the photos, they're not in fact hardwired, but they're basically plugged into the PowerPoint, so they can be removed. However, the applicant has provided some additional information to suggest that they are tamper-proof, and if the devices are tampered with or moved or unplugged, they'll go offline and will notify the applicant. So whilst they're not hardwired, they are appropriate in the circumstance, and staff maintain the recommendation of approval.
Thank you, Mr Gibson, and through you, Madam Mayor, to Mr Gibson. Can I entertain you in finding out where that information is provided in the management plan, or is that a scenario that has just been verbally provided to the town regarding, excuse me, the fail-safe device and how that gets sent through to the management of the residents? Because I did try to find that today, and I have not been able to find that information. If it's in black and white and I can sort of review that, then I'll be more than happy to move the officer's recommendation.
Through you, Madam Mayor, in terms of the attachment that Ms Kania sent out, page 12 of 61 at the top.
Thank you, Mr Gibson.
No
further questions?
Councillor McLennan.
I'm seconding.
Okay. So, so who was the mover? Councillor Ames, sorry. Okay. Seconded, Councillor McLennan. Do we have anyone against? I'll declare that carried. Okay, so 12.3, proposed outbuilding, 86 Hamilton Street, Bassendean. Councillor Carter, I think you...
Yes, I just had a question. I couldn't see it in the documents. Did we go back to the neighbour with the altered height?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes. The amended application was referred out to the neighbours for comment, which prompted one objection to be received.
So they're still objecting to
Correct.
it. It's 40 centimetres in height.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's correct. Had there been no objection, staff would have simply approved the application.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? Okay, so do I have a mover for that? Councillor McLennan, seconded. Councillor Wilding, anyone against? Councillor Carter, do you wish to enter into debate?
No, I just...
Councillors? Okay. So if we can record that as one objection, Councillor Carter, and all other councillors in favour. So I'm just checking that is correct, councillors. All the other remaining councillors were in favour of the officer's recommendation. Thank you. Okay, so That then brings us to item 13.1, notice of motion by councillor Carter. So councillors, before we move on to the procedures for this notice of motion, may I ask if there are any questions of either councillor Carter or the staff in respect to this item?
I have a question for councillor Carter, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine.
I understand your intention with this motion, councillor Carter, but I find it somewhat vague and problematic. The reference to in or near children's playgrounds and other public places in the town where children congregate. So, for example, Jubilee Reserve, where you have children playing soccer, cricket, or football, do you intend that to be included? Or Ashfield Reserve, where you've got, little athletics and so on. Like, it's very hard to understand from your motion what exactly council would be approving.
I'm trying to keep it fairly tight. The issue being with playgrounds and looking at childcare outdoor spaces, but particularly in our parks where children have, occasional sports days and things. Now, they do. In Bassendean Park, they often have their cross-country races, they have their sports days there. And it's just to try and coordinate that you don't spray on the day that you're going to have a child's sports day. I understand what you're saying, and I've tried to consider that I know that's difficult, but how much spraying do we do on our sports grounds? Do we do that much that it's not considered safe for the older children to play on?
Are you asking that question of the administration, councillor Carter?
Well, yes. So as I've been asked that question, I can't answer it. Could I ask the staff then, do we spray Jubilee Reserve very frequently?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I believe it's just once annually for broadleaf selective weed control is the main application. There might be other areas like around infrastructure that's done more frequently.
Okay. This is what I thought, but it's not frequently done. So therefore, it's just a matter of perhaps coordinating when the spraying is going and leaving the signs up longer. I don't know. So that's really what I was trying to get at, that we don't coincide spraying with the children's sport if we possibly can, or we give enough warning that it has been sprayed so that parents can make their decisions.
Councillor McWilliam, followed by councillor Ames.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to staff, do we have information as to whether the Education Department uses glyphosate regularly on their premises to control weeds?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we're not aware whether they do or they don't. They don't provide us with that information.
And just as a corollary to that, would it be possible for us to seek that information? Or do you think it's unlikely they would respond?
We can request the information. Until we request, we wouldn't know. But yes.
I have a subsequent question to that. Sorry, councillor Ames. Other entities in the town spraying, I'm assuming we've got Main Roads, Watercorp, and a few others that use these chemicals. Would that be correct?
Yes, there'd be anyone who manages private land or government land would potentially be using herbicides.
Okay. Councillor Ames.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor, and I suppose this is directed to yourself, Councillor Carter. I sort of follow Councillor Cannon's thought process in regards to the ambiguity and the broad statements that you've got, and I also feel personally that when questions are asked of you in regards to the specificity of what you want, you can't answer them. So it continues to leave me with an understanding that the motion that you're trying to provide might be a little bit of a different motion to what this is actually asking for. If we're looking at different times and different organisational structures around our week management in and around such areas of congregation for young children.
Point of order, Madam Mayor, this is a debate. Can we do the debate and then you can definitely make those sorts of statements and
I think,
questions?
okay, I didn't think it was debate. I think Councillor Ames was expressing some
An opinion?
well, maybe it's an opinion, maybe it's trying to, and I do understand that Councillor Ames did ask a similar question, I think it was 1 or 2 months ago.
Correct.
It's trying to pinpoint exactly, because notice of motion, to my mind, are supposed to provide direction to the staff. And I, as presiding person, I don't wish to get into this too much, but it does seem to lack that direction. So I'm just, and I'm following the same lines as Councillor Ames in my comments there, and I do apologise for that, Councillor Carter. Councillor Ames, have you concluded or be more specific in a question? Otherwise, I'll throw to Councillor McLennan, who's also waiting to ask a question.
No, I'm fine. Thanks, Councillor Carter, and if you can refer to Councillor McLennan.
Thank you. While I really appreciate the sentiment of what you're seeking, from what I've heard and what I understand what the town's current practices are, I feel like in some ways this is painting a picture where at present the town is spraying playgrounds and isn't timing any weed management around when children may be less likely to be present. And my understanding was there were already those practices in place, because this concern has been raised before by myself.
So Councillor McLennan, yes. Seek information from the staff on that one. So Ms Davies.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. So we do try and avoid the use of herbicides within children's playgrounds. There's some circumstances where there is an alternative. For example, there's poplars suckering at Palmerston Reserve, and there's no way of manually removing it. It'll just continue to resprout. So that's one example where we've had to use herbicides. The other is areas that have garden beds. So, for example, nature playgrounds where there might be grass weeds growing amongst the native plants, which can't be controlled in other ways because it will affect the native plants. But in general, for areas of sand or the softball area or the play equipment itself, as a part of the general maintenance, it's brush cutting, hand weeding. In terms of timing and scheduling, we currently work around bookings. So the annual turf broadleaf treatment is scheduled to avoid when the carnivals are on. With Vic Reserve, the park supervisor regularly meets with the principal there and advises him of any planned maintenance. So that's currently occurring where we know that the school is planning to use a space. We also install signage, which is up, so people are aware who are coming to the reserve to know that it's happening or has recently been undertaken.
Councillor McLennan, you had further questions?
No, I just thought the timing issue wasn't going to be addressed, but then Stevie did address it, so thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Any other councillors with questions? Councillor Wilding.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Carter, I just want to seek some clarification on your point 3, in which after 3 months the report will be sought on what to do instead of the current practices. What do you envisage happening in the 3-month period between this motion passing and the report being handed down? What's the expectation of the administration?
I don't have any expectation of the administration. It's just asking for a report to be investigated and produced. There are alternative weed strategies, and we do use some of them too. So I think that's. I'm sorry, I don't quite understand what you're asking.
So, Councillor Carter, are you suggesting that you're wishing the sorry, I'm trying to paraphrase this. You're wishing the administration to bring back reports on alternatives to chemical spraying or herbicides?
Through you, Madam Mayor. I tried to get, as I said, talking with other councillors, trying to make this as specific as I can. I don't actually see that it's not specific. The report will be, if this is passed and we limit or ban the use of glyphosate around children's playgrounds and these sorts of areas, there has to be an alternative. And I was just asking, what will the alternatives be?
So, Councillor Whiting, sorry, I must, apologies for
That's
interrupting.
right, thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you as well, just to, I suppose, clarify the question. The way I interpret the motion is that from the moment it's passed, that is a ban on glyphosate, but the alternatives that you've mentioned, even if they were to exist, wouldn't be presented to council for 3 months, which leaves a gap between the motion passing and alternatives being able to be implemented. I may be incorrect in my interpretation of the motion, but if that interpretation was correct, how do you envisage the staff responding to that gap in which there's no clear direction from council on how to manage that?
The request on point 3 was to prepare a report within 3 months outlining an alternative weed control strategy. Now, you're saying that, forgive me, you're asking me to say what will happen if this gets passed, we ban it, but we have to wait 3 months for a report. Does the bans come from the time we pass it, or does it come from the time the report comes in?
So I think I'll indicate there, point 1, if I'm reading Councillor Wilding correctly, seems to indicate that if this was passed, it goes that council does not use glyphosate. So if I am reading that correctly, it seems to indicate to me that if this was passed tonight, that the staff would not be able to use glyphosate in those areas, whereas point 3, and you know, I'm wondering, Councillor Carter, if that was your intention.
No, my intention was to phase it, well, to clearly phase it out during those 3 months, so that when the report comes in, it will be done. But if the spraying is done so infrequently, how would that be an issue?
Okay, let me ask the staff there, because the infrequent spraying applies to your larger reserves, and I'm sure because we've got an integrated weed management program of works, I'm quite sure that there are different timelines for different types of weeds. Could I actually get the staff to answer that?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the annual application is only for turf, so it's to control weeds growing in the turf. More frequent herbicide application is required for garden beds, so it would be quite frequent depending on the time of the year. It could be once a week for some areas if it's particularly problematic. And that's not in the playground, it's just in the general, you know, close to playgrounds, or it could be once a month or less frequent. So in spring is when the the grass weeds will become more active and start growing and could take over a lot of those garden beds if we weren't able to treat them.
Councillor McLennan has a question as well.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to feel like you're being interrogated. But I still feel really unsure about specifics. So a moment ago, I heard you say, if we're looking at banning or limiting, and I feel like what the staff have said to us is that they are already limiting. So what is it that you
say phasing out?
No, before that you said banning or limiting, and now phasing out. Like, it's really difficult to understand exactly what it is that you're...
Thank you, and I think that's a very good point. I'll go back to my motion, is that we don't use glyphosate around children's playgrounds. That's the key issue. The fact that we need a report is to say what else we can do apart from that. The timing of that, I'm quite happy to say that the report comes first or whatever, but that the fact that we ban it around children's playgrounds is the key issue to me.
So, Councillor Carter, you would have to amend your notice of motion to reflect what you've just said.
And what would you suggest that would be an amendment?
Councillor Wilding. So,
I
okay.
apologies, Madam Mayor. I was going to propose a potential.
Well, someone
or
else
ask
can.
Councillor Carter if they're willing to accept the potential amendment.
Okay.
Which I hope I am able to do at this time.
That's fine. I'll see where we're going with this.
Councillor Carter, would you be willing to accept a minor amendment to point 1 that changes does not use glyphosate to that council intends to phase out glyphosate and keep the rest of the motion substantially the same, which keeps the same intention but then would allow the report to come first and then for that to be flagged by the administration?
Could we say phase out glyphosate within 3 months, or at the, by 3 months, which is the time limit given for the report?
Sorry, that's probably a question for the
Is it possible?
administration.
Staff.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think the wording would need to be very specific to say which areas it would be phased out from, because at the moment there's no distance given from the edge of the playground, and it's not clearly defined where the areas are that children congregate. A lot of the methods of how we would manage that are outlined in the officer comment, so the dot points within the report are a basic summary of what we would do if that came into practice.
Can I answer that one? I think the determination of an appropriate buffer zone is up to the staff to work out. That's the thinking behind dot point 2, item 2. I know this is making everyone very uncomfortable, and I'm really, really sorry about it, but it has been an issue for an awfully long time.
So,
And
Councillor
it has been an
Carter,
issue.
Councillor Carter, I think that it's not so much uncomfortable, it is trying to pin down some of the details. Now, I've identified that if dot point 1 is not amended, then it's literally, from my reading of the document, it's literally banning glyphosate from when this notice of motion is passed, if it's passed. So there's a couple of things here that if you wish to amend your notice of motion, I'm fine with that, just so long as I know what the amendment's going to be. But could I, with your indulgence, can I just ask the staff a couple of other questions that touch on this, but I'm curious.
Can I just answer your one question first? I really don't want to amend this. I think it's specific. If councillors wish to amend it, that's indeed their right.
Well, you're the mover of, if you're moving
No,
the notice of
moving.
motion, then if somebody wishes to amend your notice of motion, you have to accept that.
Yes,
If you-
indeed,
yeah,
of course.
Yeah, so,
Absolutely, as long as it doesn't change the intent of the motion.
okay. So, I'm going to let you think on that because I can see Councillor Wilding's mind is ticking. I'm going to let you think on that. I just want to ask the staff a side question on this. If you don't mind, my understanding is that the administration and council, well, through council, have requested the administration to seek out alternatives to chemical spraying, herbicide spraying, what have you. Now, I attended an electric weed spraying trial down at Hamilton Reserve some weeks ago. Are there other investigations ongoing at the moment about alternatives to glyphosate?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The town's a member of the Walga Weed Management Working Group who are looking at trialling different methods and sharing information with other local governments as well. I'm not aware of any other new technology that's emerging, but we are just keeping informed of what is released through that group.
Okay. And can I ask, I raised the prospect of something that's happening over in Melbourne with woody meadows as a planting regime that may reduce weeds growth. We're pursuing that in the next winter season, planting season in a few areas to the trial, is that correct?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we've recently planted a woody meadow at Sandy Beach Reserve between the road and the playground. So it's a high density of planting that aims to reduce the weeds that can come up.
Yeah, okay. So I'm correct in assuming that the staff are constantly seeking out alternatives to chemical or herbicide. I shouldn't say chemical, it's herbicide spraying, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, do we have some further questions, or shall I throw back to Councillor Wilding? Okay. Okay, Councillor Wilding's shaking her head, so I think she's not proposing an amendment now. So Councillor Carter, I'm going to come back to you now and ask whether you wish to move the notice of motion as it is, or whether you wish to propose an amendment, which obviously can't be significantly different from the formatting of the current notice, but I'm interested in what you are proposing.
Yes, I really don't want this to be pushed down the road again for too much longer. I'm very willing to hear what other people can say to make this happen, bearing in mind the central tenet is that it keeps this glyphosate away from children as much as possible. So I'm open to any suggestions, but...
So you're asking other councillors if they might propose an amendment? Okay. Definitely silence around the room. Okay, so councillors, just to let you know that the administration, and yes, I was aware of that and forgot to mention it, there is a report coming back to councillors in March, which is part of the amendment that I put in for the hard surfaces. So that report is going to come back in March to provide us with an update on progress in that area. I don't know if that assists councillors in any way, shape or form. Councillor Carter, your notice of motion requests a report to come back within 3 months. March is more like 6 months or more. So Councillor Carter, would you like to move your notice of motion as it is, and we'll see if there's a seconder?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to move my motion as it exists in the agenda. Do you wish me to read it out?
Yes, so if you could read it out for the recording.
Council does not use glyphosate or other herbicides listed under scheduled poisons as defined in the Poisons Act in or near children's playgrounds and other public places in the town where children congregate. Examples of such public places could include school playing grounds, childcare outdoor areas and parks in the town when they are scheduled to be used for occasional sports days and other group events. Number 2, determines an appropriate exclusion or buffer zone around these areas in accordance with West Australian Department of Health recommendations. And 3, requests the CEO to prepare a report within 3 months outlining alternative weed control strategies to be used in places listed in point 1 above, as well as identifying any other relevant places.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. So we have that notice of motion moved. Do we have a seconder?
Madam Mayor, can I propose an amendment which, if accepted, I would second the motion? I'm not sure if I worded that correctly.
So you may need to direct that to Councillor Carter. Just read it out, please, so that everyone's aware.
No worries. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. The amendment would read, Councillor Carter, the council intends to reduce or where possible eliminate the use of herbicides listed under scheduled poisons as defined in the Poisons Act in or near children's playgrounds. We'll stop and removing the rest of that point. We've removed point 2, as I believe that would be outlined in the report, and keeps point 3 the same. Sorry, point 3 would then read, request the CEO to prepare a report in 3 months outlining alternative weed control strategies to be used in these places. Full stop. It's a big difference.
Can I just ask one question of you, Councillor Wilding? When you say limit as much as possible, what if it comes back as it's not possible when other jurisdictions have already done this?
Through you, Madam Mayor, my expectation would be if other jurisdictions are doing it, it would therefore be possible and we'd be presented with that option.
Okay.
So Councillor Carter, do you accept that amendment to your notice of motion?
So that something happens on this matter, I'll accept it, and that's at least moving us towards that understanding.
Okay.
So yes, I accept that.
So Councillor Carter has accepted your amendment to that notice of motion. Councillor Wilding, you're seconding? Okay. So we have a mover and a seconder. Do we have anyone
Can you
against?
please read out what the motion is?
Yes, please, sorry. Amy?
No, I didn't get it all down, sorry.
Okay, so Councillor Wilding.
So, that council intends to reduce, or where possible, eliminate the use of herbicides listed under scheduled poisons as defined in the Poisons Act in or near children's playgrounds. Full stop. Sorry, there's more to it.
Did you not eliminate point 2?
I eliminate point 2, excuse me, and sorry, Amy.
I'm just doing a copy and paste.
And that's right, my apologies, this has been written on the fly. So.
Sorry, I'll just go over number 1. Intends to reduce or where possible eliminate the use of herbicides listed under scheduled poisons as defined in the Poisons Act in or near children's playgrounds.
Just to double check the start of that one, intends to reduce or where possible eliminate the use of glyphosate or other herbicides listed under.
Can I interfere there? I believe, Ms Davies, it's the Medical and Poisons Act, is it?
Yes, that's correct. So the Poisons Act has been repealed and the current legislation is the Medicines and Poisons Act. Just a minor.
Medicines and Poisons Act.
So let's just finish getting this down on
Sorry,
paper
I thought she was
first.
finishing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm finished.
So we've got point 1, correct? We've eliminated point 2 and point 3.
Point 3 reads the same, so ends in outlining alternative weed control strategies to be used in these places. Also.
Can I ask just one more question? So it's just playgrounds you're now talking about, not the parts where the children.
That is correct.
Congregate.
So the reasoning behind that is we have a weed management strategy for those areas already, is my understanding. And you described your intention of this motion to focus specifically on children's playgrounds. I'm trying to refine it.
Can I just point out my intention was to keep children away
So
from
Councillor
the
Carter, it's entirely up to you if you accept these amendments as the mover of the motion. You have total freedom to accept or reject any particular amendment that's put to you.
Given that my motion won't be supported otherwise, as I've got that feeling very strongly, at least this is something, so I will accept it.
Okay.
And we can probably build from there, I hope.
Okay, so I will just check with the minutes clerk that you have all of that information now.
I do have it all. Do you want me to read
Okay.
it?
So we have mover Councillor Carter, seconded with conditional changes, Councillor Wilding. Councillor McLennan.
I just had a question for the officers. I'm a bit unclear. You get this motion passed by council, what that means for you. So what's the word? And council intends to, like, what does that actually practically team meeting for you tomorrow.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I believe it would create some confusion for officers in exactly how to implement that. And that would be guided through in terms of having to eliminate it on the ground that it's probably not clear enough for us to make that determination.
Madam Mayor, would aspires to provide any more direction in that regard? As opposed to intends to?
Aspires. Is it the timing?
Yeah.
The timing issue.
Okay, it's the timing issue. So perhaps dot point 3 if you did 6 months, maybe.
I think it's the report will outline how it can practically be implemented and what those strategies will look like, rather than making it apply straight away.
But the intention at the moment is for it not to commence as
Until
soon as
the
the motion is
report.
passed.
Okay.
It is the wording that I propose not achieve that.
I think, yeah, there's probably some clarification around that.
Can I get Amy to read out point 1 again, because that
council intends to reduce or where possible eliminate the use of glyphosate and or other herbicides listed under scheduled poisons as defined in the Medicines and Poisons Act in or near children's playgrounds.
the word intends
Perhaps
seeks.
and the report will provide that clarity.
I'm happy to.
So councillor, comes back to you again, councillor Carter, with point 1.
Can I maybe make a suggestion? So at the moment we've got point 1 and point 3. Maybe if it is about an intention, it would be better to include that intention in the request for a report. So something along the lines of, and I haven't thought about this yet, but the council requests the CEO to prepare a report that reflects council's intention to reduce herbicides, blah, 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 blah. Would that, something along those lines?
I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Because
I
that's
don't know,
the,
councillor Carter, whether that's something that would appeal to you?
I would have thought alternative weed control strategies would have covered that, but
It's more to avoid this confusion at the beginning about what happens now. So if council has said this is the intention, does that mean that that's what we want reflected in our future practices this report will present for us, or is it something that the staff are expected to now phase out without that additional
I think
guidance?
you've made that clear. So yes, look, fine, you can change that.
Okay. So,
I haven't got wording for
sorry.
that. Sorry, question of Councillor McClellan, if I may. Would that proposal then reduce it to point 3 that contains or relevant information? Or point 1, I guess it would be.
I think so.
Okay.
Can I ask one question? Will the report also address the issues of scheduling around, sorry, forgive me. Ms Davey, you say that you've told us that you talk to schools and you schedule when spraying is to when their school carnivals, and that's a formal process or an informal one?
Through Madam Mayor, I think, and that's that our Parks and Garden Supervisor coordinates his works on reserves that are used by the schools for their activities. I believe at the moment that would fall as an informal process, but he does have regular and constant contact with the principals and the relevant people at the Department of Education.
Okay, so that's a strategy that you use all the time, or, I mean, is it a strategy that your Parks and Gardens supervisors?
That's the strategy undertakes, and also references it to any bookings we have for our reserves.
Okay, thank you.
Can I also ask, my understanding is that certain types of weeds in certain areas require timing, best timing in winter or summer and things like that. So you've got scheduling that happens specifically for certain areas at certain times.
Yes, that's correct, Madam Mayor. So they're targeted to reduce their likelihood of spreading seeds. They're targeted for their flowering seed.
Thank you.
Maybe to read out the revised wording.
So I'm going to ask the minutes clerk to read out the revised, let's make this the last revised reading of this. Sorry, Councillor
Sorry,
Ryan.
Madam Mayor, I understand you just suggested that in the last one that I had potential wording to incorporate Councillor Clemens in a considerably simpler.
Okay, that's fine.
With you.
Read it out. And this is going to be
Make
the
your
last
suggestion.
one, okay?
That's all right. Should Councillor Carter accept it? Amendment would read, Council requests the CEO to prepare a report within 3 months outlining alternative weed control strategies so as to reduce or where possible eliminate the use of glyphosate or other herbicides in or near children's playgrounds. If that meets all the requirements.
I was gonna wait and see if everyone was happy.
So is this a new point 3 or is this a new whole?
Replacement.
This would be
1 point.
1 point, essentially condensing points
The whole-
3 into one,
Right, okay, that's what I thought, but I'm just checking.
removing some bits of the original motion.
Okay, so Councillor Carter, it's back to you.
Well, it
Amy, have you got that one?
No, I
Right,
can't type that fast, I'm sorry.
sorry, Councillor
we'll
Wilding,
wait.
Councillor Wilding.
My apologies, Madam Mayor, I think the minute clerk was waiting to see if the amendment was going to be accepted by Councillor Carter before voting it.
So Councillor Carter, do you accept that?
I can say that it does water down my notice of motion. However, it does contain the principle that glyphosate is not to be
Okay,
used near.
so it's
children's
acceptable
playgrounds
to
as much as
yourself,
possible.
Councillor Carter?
So in that respect, I'll say I'll accept it because it's better than.
Okay, so Councillor Carter has moved, Councillor Wilding has accepted the amendment, Councillor Wilding has seconded,
I'll read it out.
Yes, please, thank you, I will try to keep up.
That Council one, does it need a one, it's just a single one. The Council requests the CEO to prepare a report within 3 months outlining alternative weed control strategies so as to reduce or where possible eliminate the use of glyphosate or other herbicides in or near children's playgrounds. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
so we have a mover and a seconder. I could foreshadow an alternative at this point. But what I'm going to do is see if we have anyone against this.
Just a question, Madam Mayor.
Yep.
And through to Councillor Carter, to Councillor Wilding, that's the motion,
Yes.
just that 1 point,
Yes.
just the report.
Yes.
Sorry.
Because I think Councillor Carter's thinking different.
Yes. Your original motion had those 2 parts and you were rolling them up in one.
One, yes,
Now
that's,
you
yeah,
have left off the first part,
Correct,
which is
that's
talking
right.
about the
Just want to
playground.
make sure that everyone's aware of that.
Sorry.
Especially yourself.
Just
Yes,
to be
exactly.
clear, so there was, I put forward 2 alternative motions.
Yeah,
The
so-
first in 2 points and the
Mhm.
second one condensed into a singular point. The singular point one does take away the immediate does not use glyphosate because of the staff's guidance that doesn't provide them any time to actually implement anything else in the interim. So the intention behind this single point is to get the report, and while that use may continue for the next few months, once council receives that report, they can then make an informed decision based on all the facts to cease that use of glyphosate from then on, which the administration has had time to plan and account for.
so we've had the amendment read out a couple of times now.
Mhm.
So really, we're entering into an area here. It's a matter of if Councillor Carter accepts that or not.
Is the intention still not to use glyphosate around children's playgrounds?
It's It's been read out
Mhm.
a couple of times, so it's coming back as a report. So,
But only coming back as a report on how to limit, rather than that we have an intention not to.
okay, I'm going to get the
Sorry,
minutes clerk
yes,
to
please.
read this out one more time, councillors. I want everyone to sit down, listen carefully, and it's on this amendment that we are talking now. Otherwise, we revert back to the original notice of motion and simply go that way. So, one more time, thank you.
That council requests the CEO prepare a report within 3 months outlining alternative weed control strategies so as to reduce or where possible eliminate the use of glyphosate or other herbicides in or near children's playgrounds.
The intention is there.
So, do you accept?
I'll accept it.
Okay. So, back to where we started. Councillor Wilding has proposed an amendment. Councillor Carter has accepted that amendment. So we have a mover and a seconder. Do we have anyone against? Councillor McWilliam. At this point, I'm going to foreshadow an alternative, and I'll read that out so that if this fails, then we will go to, my alternative will not be discussed or voted on until this notice of motion has been resolved. So my foreshadowed notice of motion is that Council 1 reaffirms the town's commitment to limiting the use of glyphosate and other herbicides to the minimum, including the ongoing practice of not applying it within the immediate area of playgrounds, softball surfaces or play equipment. And 2, notes the town's ongoing commitment to continuously review its approach to weed management to evaluate latest developments and best practices. And 3, requests the CEO to provide an annual update on advances in the town's weed management via the CEO bulletin to councillors. So we will now revert back to this particular amended motion. We have Councillor Carter has moved, Councillor Wilding has seconded, Councillor McWilliam is against. So we will enter into debate. Councillor Carter, would you like to open?
Thank you. And I just want to reassure staff and councillors that my motion is in no way a criticism of what has been happening in the past and the present. I'm aware that conscientious and knowledgeable staff have had to make hard decisions on how to manage this issue. But my notice of motion is just to keep children away from glyphosate. And it is clear to do that. It's now been watered down somewhere. But anyway, what we do know, and if you don't mind me reading it, because I've got so many things in my head at the moment, what we do know and what the makers of Roundup agree is that their product is a toxin and it needs to be used with extreme care. And nobody knows what the long-term effects will be, and it's currently banned, as we all know, in many states in the USA, countries in Europe and around the world. New Zealand is currently contemplating a ban. There's no doubting glyphosate's potency as a plant killer, nor its usefulness as part of measures to control invasive weed species. But let us be clear. I'm not asking for its general use to be banned. Roundup Bioactive may well have a role to play in combating Bassendean's weeds, but that's actually not relevant to this. And I know that some natural remedies can be even more problematic, like salt and vinegar and so on. And that too is not relevant. Now, glyphosate has been declared by the APVMA, which I understand is also based on the USA EPA findings, to not cause cancer. But not all scientific and medical trial studies agree with that conclusion. And there are other concerns around children's health, without just being cancer. So I'd like to refer my fellow councillors, and I ask you, this has been going on a while, so please indulge me, to the following article published in the Guardian Australia only last month. And the headline states, disturbing, and I can pass you the link to this one, disturbing weed killer ingredient tied to cancer found in 80% of US urine samples. And the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention in the USA study finds glyphosate present in the majority of urine samples taken from adults and children. Monsanto and the company that bought it in 2018, Bayer, have maintained that their products are safe and that residues in food and human urine are not a health risk, but they are at odds with many researchers and the International Agency for Research on Cancer, a unit of the World Health Organization which classified glyphosate as a probable human contamination, and ordering the agency to give further considerations to the evidence of risks. And I think Ms Brimmer pointed this out, that they have a re-registration program in the USA, which we don't have here. And it said, people of all ages should, and I'm quoting here, people of all ages
Councillor
should be...
Carter, I just need you to wind up.
Okay. I'll just quote, this quote is that I'm particularly concerned for children. Children more heavily exposed to pesticides than adults because pound for pound they eat more, drink more water and breathe more air. And they have many years of future life where these things might manifest themselves.
So, Councillor Carter, you...
So I will conclude. My motion only seeks specifically to enshrine in our policy and practice a stated ban on spraying near playgrounds. Other jurisdictions, both locally and around the world, have done so successfully. I hope with my fellow councillors' support we can too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Councillor Wilding?
Madam Mayor, and I'll keep it very brief because everyone's indulged me quite a bit tonight already. Broadly, I agree with the idea of reducing use as much as possible, eliminating where possible. I agree with Ms Brimmer's comments around the precautionary principle. And I think when we take long-standing views of what to do and what risks to take, I think that it should be a prevailing principle. However, it needs to be done in a way that can be rolled out, needs to be practical, needs to be pragmatic. I believe that this alternative motion, this amendment to the original motion achieves both goals. Creates a pragmatic and practical way of achieving it while also hopefully resulting in that end goal, and therefore would encourage my fellow councillors to vote for it.
Thank you, Councillor Wilding. Councillor McWilliam, you are against?
So just go back to my earlier question about the broader use of glyphosate in the town of Bassendean, and that this is not just the council that is using glyphosate, and over many years has used glyphosate, no doubt. So there are other property owners, other state government agencies and private entities who are seeking to manage weeds on their properties or within their jurisdictions. And I think that it would be useful for us to understand a bit more about the other state government agencies that are in the town that are using weed control involving chemicals. I don't think it is the town's sole responsibility to respond to this. I think that clearly there's an argument that probably needs to be happening at the state government level. And may then filter down to local government at some point. But at this stage, it seems to be a much bigger game. In fact, on an international level, clearly, there's much conversation, debate and dispute. And I take on board the points that Councillor Carter has made in her notice of motion. So I guess that there is a lot of debate going on. It's disputed about whether there is this sort of carcinogenic aspect to glyphosate or any other health legacies, for want of a better term, and impacts that might occur as a result. I think that clearly there's a particular concern for children in all of this. I think the efficacy of the alternatives that we've had discussed very lightly today, which is about steam, it was very expensive and not very successful. And so I believe that we probably need to do an investigation, but I don't know that the town of Bassendean is the sole responsible agency within this area.
Thank you, Councillor McWilliam. Any councillors for the motion? Councillors against? Well, no, I'm not taking a vote yet. Speakers for or against. Okay. I would like to just speak against the notice of motion, and I'll keep it brief. Basically, I agree that I would like to see no herbicides used. That's my aspiration. However, I also understand that there are not many alternatives on the horizon at the moment, and an integrated approach seems to be necessary at this time. I asked questions of the staff, in particular about seeking out alternative new methodologies, and my understanding is, having liaised with the staff now on this point for some time, that they are as keen as what we are to find alternatives to glyphosate. Finding those alternatives is not as easy as everybody would like it to be. The alternative costs to using glyphosate, and I know I will be crucified for mentioning costs. However, we are a small council, and an integrated approach where we minimise the use of herbicides whilst engaging in a range of other methods is proving to be the best way thus far. Am I hopeful that in the future we will have alternatives to replace herbicides? Absolutely. Do I wish we had those alternatives today? Absolutely. In the absence of that, I believe that one of my reasons for not supporting this notice of motion happens to be the timeline. The 3-month timeline to me is too short. Having gone to various weeding trials over the last 12 months, I don't see any one of these methodologies as being a solution in its entirety. I think that we need to have an approach that will allow the staff to transition wherever they find solutions that will work in certain areas. I believe we need to allow the staff to transition in a timeline that is appropriate. And I don't think that 3 months is just going to do it. I think that that's way too short. So I appreciate the sentiment. I applaud the sentiment of wishing to ban herbicides. However, I cannot support this notice of motion in its current format. And for that, I really am sorry. And I applaud the councillors who have these aspirations, as do many of us around this table. So that's my debate. Any other councillors who wish to debate on this item for or against? Okay, in that case, I'm going to put it to the vote.
I had a
Oh, sorry, you. Apologies. I'm so sorry, Councillor Carter. I do that all the time.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I understand. Just briefly, to answer Councillor McWilliams, it's not the town of Bassendean's responsibility for other. We deal with what we do and what our staff do. So that's just one thing. And secondly, that this has been an issue that's gone on for a while. So I think 3 months is probably quite long enough to get a report through, because we're not now having an outright ban. We've got an intention, and we're hoping to build from that. So I would say that the motion has been changed, should be passed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. So I'll put this to the vote. Those councillors in favour of the amended motion put forward by Councillor Carter,
Councillor,
just raise your hands. So we've got Councillor Carter, Councillor Wilding and Councillor McLennan. Those councillors against, we have a tie. So I have to use my casting vote.
That's great.
Well, that's disappointing. So
before you make that vote, could I ask the staff, do you think it's possible to bring a short report about alternative methods that can be used around children's playgrounds within 3 months?
So I'm going to allow it. Councillor, yes.
Through you, Madam Mayor, Yes, that's possible. The majority of that content of the report we already have the information for.
Thank you.
Do you think it's? Actually, we're in the vote. I shouldn't be.
I ask a question. They can't implement the processes of a report. Where does that leave us?
So, councillors, I'm going to surprise you and use my casting vote and change my vote to support, because if a report comes at that point in time, we will be provided with an ability to ascertain whether there are ways to move forward. So, apologies for such a long, drawn-out debate about this. So, it's carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rarely am I that often on the cusp.
It's a report.
Great,